I want to talk a little bit about Notre Dame's 47-40 victory over Clemson. And one of the things that I'm seeing being discussed here now on Sunday after the game is the notion of what does Notre Dame's win over Clemson without Trevor Lawrence and other players mean, but primarily Trevor Lawrence. There's really two trains of thought that I see here, and I think both are incorrect and both need to be sort of dismissed. And the first is Notre Dame barely beat Clemson without Trevor Lawrence and Tyler Davis and other players. Therefore, it somehow diminishes as Notre Dame's win. Notre Dame is also a team that's not 100%. You could say just as easily that Notre Dame with a healthy Kevin Austin or a healthy Braden Lindsey would also be a better football team. You'd have two of the more dynamic players on the roster would have been healthy. What would have Notre Dame's game looked like last night? Ian Book threw for 310 yards against Clemson without the two most explosive receivers that they have. What would that have done for the Notre Dame rush game, which went for over 200 yards, if Clemson had to respect the deep ball more effectively, which they did not do last night? So we could kind of have this back and forth all game long. Here's the whole point about Notre Dame and Clemson without Trevor Lawrence. Number one is there's so many factors that go into how the game would have been played out with Trevor Lawrence in the game. There's all types of scenarios you could look at. What would Notre Dame's game plan have been with Trevor Lawrence in the game? Would players have stepped up for Clemson like Amari Rodgers, Cornell Powell? Would they have felt the need to step up without a freshman quarterback in the game? Sometimes when you have a great player, you have a tendency as a player who maybe is not on that level to say, hey, so-and-so's got this. Trevor's got this, so I'll let him make a play. Whereas when even a talented five-star freshman like Clemson had steps into the lineup, you may say, hey, we got the young guy in there. We have to step up. We see that a lot with backup quarterbacks. We've seen it for years, not at just the college level, but also at the NFL level. When a backup quarterback comes in the game and all of a sudden the team gets hot, then eventually that guy goes and signs with another franchise, and he's never as good as he was during that backup period because you just don't know how teams are going to respond when your star player's out. We don't know how Notre Dame's defense would have responded last night with Trevor Lawrence. Maybe they'd have played even worse. Maybe Clemson offense would have been much better. Maybe Clemson wouldn't have been as good. So there's just so many things that go into it. But here's the reality. Clemson did miss Trevor Lawrence last night. They did miss Tyler Davis last night. I think they missed those two players much more so than they missed the two linebackers. Just like I think Notre Dame absolutely misses Braden Lindsey, not having him healthy this season, and they also miss Kevin Austin. So I think that we need to kind of dismiss that whole conversation because there are so many other factors at play. So I think the notion that Notre Dame's win doesn't mean as much because they didn't have Trevor Lawrence really takes away from how great last night's game was. And the fact of the matter is, you also can't say that Notre Dame would have lost if Trevor Lawrence plays because, again, you don't know what kind of focus that would have put on the Notre Dame offense. Knowing that Trevor Lawrence is on the other sideline, would Notre Dame have taken more chances? When Notre Dame was aggressive against Clemson last night, they were really effective. They made big plays. Would they have been even more aggressive if Trevor Lawrence would have played? We don't know the answer to that. All we know is how the game was played last night. Would Clemson have – and the other, I think the thing that Notre Dame fans are making a mistake of is the notion that, well, the freshman quarterback played phenomenal, so they didn't miss a beat with Trevor Lawrence. Yes, they did. Clemson's not the same team without Trevor Lawrence, which is why their two most recent games without him also happen to be their two worst third down games of the season. So Clemson absolutely did miss Trevor Lawrence. They absolutely did miss Tyler Davis, just like Notre Dame misses Braden Lindsey and Kevin Austin. But none of those things matter because football is a game of attrition. You win and you lose with what you have. And last night, the team that Notre Dame put on the field was flat out better than the team that Clemson put on the field. And I think a case could be made that it was actually Notre Dame who was the far more dominant team for many plays during this game because Notre Dame is the team that left more points on the field. When Clemson got chances to score, they scored. When Notre Dame had chances to score, it was missed opportunities, whereas Clemson had to settle for field goals because of, you break the game down, great plays being made by the Notre Dame defense, where Notre Dame actually not scoring had to do more with their own mistakes, a false start on the 4th and 1, which forces a field goal. Did anybody watching the first half of last night's game really think that Clemson was going to stop Notre Dame on 4th and 1? We don't know. But if you look at how the game played out, I feel good about Notre Dame's chances of converting that 4th and 1 and not only moving the chains, but then maybe even scoring on that play. The next time Notre Dame is in a situation where they get down there, Ian Book scrambles. He hits Michael Mayer. He's open. He catches the ball. He walks into the end zone for a touchdown. He drops the ball. Notre Dame settles for a field goal. And then, of course, Ian Book's fumble inside the 5. So it was more about just Notre Dame not taking advantage of those opportunities. So when you look forward to the ACC title game with Notre Dame and Clemson, which is what I think we all believe is going to happen, you can't just say, well, now you have Trevor Lawrence or Tyler Davis, so automatically Clemson's a better team, because what I saw last night from Notre Dame was a team that played hard, played with a lot of heart, has legitimate stud players, but we also saw a team that still has a lot to clean up. There is another level for this Notre Dame defense to get to, and there's definitely another level for the Notre Dame offense to get to. Now, if Notre Dame can do that between now and the ACC title game, then the Irish are going to have a chance to compete with and potentially beat Clemson again. It's going to be hard, but if they play better, there's plenty of room for them to play better, then they'll have a chance in that game. And if Clemson beats Notre Dame on December 19th with Trevor Lawrence, you don't retroactively look back and say, well, see, they'd have beat him again in November had they had Trevor Lawrence. That's not how football works. You can't really know the answer to that. But what we can know is last night, with the guys in uniform that both teams had, Notre Dame was clearly the better team, and that's why at the end of the day, Notre Dame got the W.